I believe that's a really tall order. Like we mentioned media, but then we have social media. And I see with myself already that nothing excites me more than writing an angry comment, under a political debate on Facebook or Instagram or somewhere. I love to be upset, even though I know this is the stupidest thing that exists. And probably this is what drives the attention economy, or a large part of it, right? So how can we go beyond that? Like, I know that this is complete, excuse my language, bullshit, but
absolutely,
I can't help myself to not write that really sassy, angry comment under there.
That's right. And the solution is simple: quit. Just cold turkey. Just shut everything down. Oof. That's what I did. A few months ago, precisely because I got to your same conclusion, which, by the way, is backed up by pretty solid science. I mean,
of course,
the reason these things happen, the reason you feel that way, is because the system is actually, the technology is designed for that, because that is what maximizes these companies' profit. So for several years, I was very active on both Facebook and Twitter. And when people were pointing out to me that maybe this wasn't the best place to be in order, if you're interested in learning things and participating, fostering public debate, maybe that's not the place to be. Whenever people were telling me that, I was answering, well, but these are just technologies. Technologies are neutral. It depends on how you use it, right? Yeah, sure. You can be angry all the time and put stuff that makes no sense, or you can just use it reasonably and be constructive and all that sort of stuff. I thought for a long time, this is up to you. The technology itself is actually neutral. Nah, not really. It turns out that a lot of technology are not neutral at all. In fact, there is a book that came out just a few months ago, the title of which literally is "Technology is Not Neutral."
I mean, you can use a gun to scratch your back, but that's not why it was designed.
Exactly.
Right?
It's not exactly right. That's exactly right. So, yes, it's true that to some extent it is up to the user, right? There could be technologies that are meant for things, to build things, let's say like a hammer, for instance, meant to actually be used as a tool to build things, but you can crush somebody's skull with it if you really want to. So there are positive technologies that can be used for negative uses, but there are some technologies that are inherently negative, and it becomes very difficult to use them for good. And your example of a gun is perfectly in line with that. Yes, you can, if you want to, you can use it to scratch your head, but that's not what it's designed for. It's designed to kill people. So I think the same is for social media. I mean, there is a colleague of mine at NYU who is a sociologist, Jonathan Haidt. And, Jonathan and I often don't see eye to eye. We have disagreements about the relationship between ethics and sociology and psychology. But I think he wrote an article recently in The Atlantic that is a prelude to a book that I think he's working on, where he basically claims that one of the major disasters of the 21st century is the rise of social media, that he documents a lot of negative effects of social media. And in this particular case, I think Jonathan is right. There's no question in my mind anymore. So then I asked myself the question, okay, so what can I do about it? And my first response was, okay, I'm going to just trying to be more careful in the use of these tools. Because after all, there are a few things positive about social media. I could keep in touch with my family and friends, for instance, from around the world more easily on Facebook. I could follow people on Twitter that I think are, post interesting stuff and learn things that I might not have learned otherwise. So it is possible to use those media in the way in which you scratch your head with a gun. But it's very, very difficult, and there are better ways to do it. So what I decided was that after a few months of trying to use those media more carefully and more, in a more temperate fashion, etc., it's like, no, this is just not going anywhere. So I just quit, cold turkey. And some of my friends were upset because, like, wait a minute, now I don't have any way to follow, what you're doing and what, etc. And I thought, look, there are alternatives. So yeah, my friends and relatives cannot follow me on Facebook. But guess what? We can still talk on the phone. We can still chat. We can still email. It's not like I'm out of technology entirely. I'm just out of social media, of particular type, conception of social media. The same goes for people who are interested in my work, readers and stuff like that. Yeah, you could follow me on Facebook or Twitter, but you can also go straight to my blog and we can have interactions there. The difference there is that if you come to my blog, you are interested. The whole thing is moderated. It's a closed environment. It's much, much easier to have high quality conversations in even public high quality conversations than it is on social media, where you have a number of strangers. You have no idea who they are, and they are free to say whatever the hell they want.
I read your blog post on how you quit social media, and what really got me, it was like a punch to the stomach, is at the end I think you say, well, we're here for a finite amount of years, and at the end, when it's all said and done, are you really gonna be thinking about, I should have spent more time on social media? Probably not.
Right.
Yeah. So, but on the other hand, for example, this podcast, I can't reach an audience unless I do some social media, and like you said, it's so damn hard to just go cold turkey.
I hear you. I mean, one of the things that happened, for instance, is that I quit social media just a few months before The Quest for Character came out. And my agent and my editor were not exactly happy about that, right? Because they said, wait a minute, but now how are you going to advertise your book and make sure that people know that it's out? But again, I'm a scientist, so I looked into the quantitative evidence. I said, okay, well, so the assumption is that if you have, let's say in my case, I had like 50,000 followers on Twitter. The assumption is that if you have thousands or tens of thousands of followers or even millions, then you're going to sell a lot of books because people are going to be... Turns out that's not true. The what is called the conversion rate, that is the number of people, the fraction that of your followers who actually goes out there and buys the book or subscribes to your podcast or whatever it is. It's actually tiny. It's a really tiny fraction, which hardly makes it worth it. I mean, out of 50,000 people, only a few dozens buy a book if I put out repeated posts about it. That's just not worth the effort. And there are other ways to do it. Like, for instance, I produce a podcast as well called Philosophy as a Way of Life with a colleague of mine called, his name is Rob Coulter. He's at University of Wyoming. And what we do is we put out the podcast on a platform, Anchor in our case, and then that platform actually distributes it to a number of other places like Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, etc. And I advertise the podcast to my mailing list. I have a mailing list of actual names and of people, an email that is now several thousand people. Turns out that, and also I post it on my blog. Now, it turns out that those return rates are much higher because if somebody gives you their email address to put on a list, that means they really are interested. They're not just somebody who clicked like once, 5 years ago, and now he's a follower, but he actually doesn't see anything of the stuff that I'm publishing. So I think that even that idea that you just brought up, which is a very common point that podcasters and bloggers and authors often bring up about the usefulness of social media. It turns out even that one is actually highly debatable. The return rate on social media is very low, and there are alternatives. I understand, if you say, well, I just put my podcast in the void and nobody's going to listen, then why am I going to do, make the effort? But you don't have to post in the void. There are other ways to build an audience. There are more constructive ways of interacting with your audience. So I honestly have not regretted that decision.